Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a ranking video of every single Goosebumps camping story ranked from worst to best. Now, I started this channel around 2020, and it's 2023 now at the time I'm making this video, so it's taken me a long time to get through all these camping stories, and some are more fresher in my mind than others, so forgive me if I have more to say about other books or other stories than some other things. If I'm being honest, the camping stories to me, at a certain point of my ranking, they all kind of blend. I picked 15 stories to talk about, so there's a lot to cover in this video. We're talking about full books, short stories, episode adaptations, TV books, give yourself, you name it, stuff like that. It's all over the place. So it's taken me a while to get caught up into this point, like I said. But I will say this up front. For the camping stories and Goosebumps, for the most part, I don't think there's a bad one in the bunch, minus my dead last one. Which is saying a lot, because the camping stories used to be a tradition in Goosebumps, at least in the classical and neoclassical eras of the book series. In the moderns, I think there's been only like one or two stories released involving the camp subgenre, so it's very sparse. And I know a lot of fan favorite books out there are camping books, and if my list does not correlate your list specifically or whatever order you would have, it's totally fine. Taste is subjective. Let me know down in the comment section before we go any further of what your list would be. What's your favorite camping book? What's your least favorite in the series? I want to know these things, okay? So without further ado, we have 15 things to talk about, and I guess I'll start with number 15 because this is the only bad thing that's remotely, this level in the Goosebumps camping subgenre. And it's an adaptation that was put into Scary Summer, which was Goosebumps Graphics number 3. And it's the adaptation by Kyle Baker of The Horror at Camp Jelly Jam. I gave this thing a 2 out of 5 stars. It is pretty bad. It's one of those things, though, that the art and how the story is laid out on page is the whole detracting point for the story for me. Now, I do like some mild direction changes that they made, kind of adding some representation of, minorities as the characters. I like that. I do like some mild changes that they made in the story that I didn't pick up on, like characters crying in certain scenes. I wasn't thinking about that. So it's, for the most part, I think technically planned out and savvy and sound. But when you look at the art, look at this art. This art is enough to just completely take me out of the story. I didn't like one single panel in this whole adaptation, minus this one panel here, and it's of the iconic Monster King Jelly Jam. This right here was easily the best part of it. Everything else was a big old goose egg. I really can't fathom, especially in this collection. Like Ted Naife's Ghost Beach was really good, and then Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes by Dean Haspiel, I think is one of the understated best adaptations in the Goosebumps graphic series. And then you have this by Kyle Baker, and no offense to Kyle Baker, please don't take it like I'm trying to hate on Kyle for making this. I'm sure that your art has some type of fan base going for it, but for me, this almost kind of ruined Horror at Camp Jelly Jam for me. Kind of like how the person who did Night of the Living Dummy ruined Night of the Living Dummy for me. What was his name? Why is it? I can't think of the name. It'll come to me. Let me know down in the comment section if you know the name of the person. But yeah, I was just not a fan of this art whatsoever. It's easily the worst thing associated with the subgenre in Goosebumps history. Now at number 14, we have a Series 2000 book. It was one of the 2 camp books from the series, and it's book number 8, Fright Camp. And I gave this a 3.3 out of 5 stars, which is a middle to high D tier for me. And the reason why I put this book this low was because I was just frustrated with pretty much the final act of the book wholesale. It's one of those all-for-nothing Goosebumps books, and for me personally, I don't like all-for-nothing books because it makes me feel like I wasted my time, and this is one of the key examples I can share with you all that waste your time in the series. I mean, nothing that happens in this book ends up mattering whatsoever by the end because of lazy recontextualizations and just really poor planning. And it feels like Stein had this decent idea because there's some really good body horror and some shock value moments in the story that kind of got to me. And the characters were written kind of sitcom-y and made it more entertaining and lighthearted than usual. It's also grounded in realism. There's nothing supernatural or anything to the book. But Stein got kind of wish-washy with the plot. He made some characters disappear from the story completely after he propped them up in the first half of the book. And the final half feels so rushed through and just lazily put together that, you know, it's frustrating. You know, it's definitely scarier and more tense than a lot of other Goosebumps books that I probably would put in the same bracket. But, you know, it could be worse in the series. Fright Camp, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad book. I don't think it's good nor bad. It's mostly just pushing okay to me. There's a lot of superlatives I use in that D tier for me, but yeah, Fright Camp is just one of the weaker ones, unfortunately. And right above it, and it's honestly, these two can be interchanged at all times for me. This comes from the modern era of the books. It's from the Horrorland series, and it's book number 9, Welcome to Camp Slither. I gave this a 3.4 out of 5 stars, which is still a high D. You know, this is pretty much the most okay thing I've ever read in Goosebumps history. This is an Arc 1 Horrorland story, so you have to know that the 100-page constraints for the main story arc does hold back its pace, and the pacing in this story is atrocious. A lot of things get skimmed over. It's very loose in how logic works in the story. And a lot of the plot points, unfortunately, if you've read any or if all the original 62 Camp books, you've read this story before. You know what's going to happen. It's very predictable. The monster in the story isn't even that creepy. And I think maybe the biggest thing that this book can have a legacy for is the fact that the Art of Goosebumps book mentioned that there was a lost book called When the Snake Bites, which was supposed to be the 27th book of Series 2000. And some people seem to think that this book could have been that. And if it is, that's kind of cool. And I kind of headcanon this as that lost book, because there's nothing else to go off of at this point. So, yeah, minus that, it's just very weak compared to the other Camp books, in my opinion. Okay, so there's that. All right, at number 12, we have the first short story we're going to be talking about. This all the short stories in this video come from the same collection. It's More Tales to Give You Goosebumps, which was special edition number 2 in the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series. This is my reader copy, so ignore the heavy damage on it. And the story I want to bring up here is, what is it called? The Werewolf's First Night. That's what it's called. It's the first story in this collection here. Now, The Werewolf's First Night, if I'm being honest, y'all, this book does not... It has a lot of good stories in it centered around the camp. You have like Poison Ivy, which is higher on this list. You have P.S. Don't Write Back. But then you have this story. And I'm a sucker for a good werewolf story or a good lycanthrope story. And while this little tale does have some tense moments to it, you know where it's going. It's very reminiscent to a Haunting Hour episode called Afraid of Clowns, which was actually adapted from the short story from one of R.L. Stein's Haunting Hour / Nightmare Hour collections. And it's almost uncanny how close these stories are. But here it's just werewolves instead of just clowns in the Haunting Hour episode, right? I think what brings it down this low is the ending. It's kind of weak, in my opinion. There's not a lot to it. Right when the story starts to get good, it pretty much ends. And that's why I have it here. You know, there's far worse short stories in the Tales series, but there's also far better camping stories as well. So that's why I kind of lands here. This is one of the ones that just land where it does by default. So yeah. And kind of rounding out the bottom 5 here, we have the first original 62 Camp book I want to bring up, and it's number 11, The Curse of Camp Cold Lake. Now, The Curse of Camp Cold Lake, I gave a 3.5 out of 5, or maybe like a 3.6, somewhere in that range. This is a very low C tier book. It's heavily flawed in my opinion. It's pretty much 50-50 for me. Half of this book I love and half of it I don't. Literally the first half of this book I absolutely hate with a burning passion. The main character is very divisive in the community, and I can understand if you read her character a certain way and you like her character for some things or whatsoever, or whatever the case may be. But for me, what really sells me on this book is the second half. Once the main villain Della kicks on in the story. Della's one of my favorite Goosebumps villains of all time, and it's mostly fun until the ending. The ending is very weird and makes no logical sense whatsoever of how this came to be. It honestly feels like Stein wrote the ending first and then tried to form a book around it, but then kind of forgot some context to make it make sense, and it's a very messy book. I really don't understand how this one could be somebody's favorite Goosebumps book, but I kind of can at the same time because Della's just outright terrifying. But the controversy, I've talked about this book in the past, about the controversy behind it with the main character. I'm kind of on the side that thinks it's not for me. It's just really, it's borderline bad taste involving a certain action the main character takes, and I'm just not a fan of that at all. I think it's a very bad thing to include in a kid's horror book, but nonetheless, I think it's still better than the ones below it, just not by much, really. You know, but this, we're talking full books. Fright Camp, Welcome to Camp Slither, and this book all kind of blend, if I'm being honest. And I don't mean to come off rude or anything when I say that. I'm just speaking my truth. So there's that. All right. Now at number 10, we're entering the middle five here. We're starting to get into territory of stuff that I actually do like. And this one, in my opinion, is the most overhated Goosebumps book of all time. I really don't understand the hate behind this. This is the second camp book from Series 2000, and it's book number 19, Return to Ghost Camp. Now, I can totally understand people's gripes about the book. It's in name only to the original Ghost Camp. It's nowhere near as good as the first Ghost Camp, and I'll be honest with you. Ghost Camp, you'll see very high on my list very soon. But this book, however, it's actually surprising how creepy and how different it was for a camp book in this series. And if you just take the Return to Ghost Camp aspect, the title out of it, and you just treat it like its own standalone book, it's a Ghost Camp rehash, but there's a lot of fresh ideas. Now, the fresh ideas, I think, come to fruition in the back half of the book. I think this book has one of the best endings in Goosebumps history, period. However, there are some things involving the plot that just don't add up. Like, there's some characters that you meet that, introduce stipulations to the main character, and they go through this whole body swapping or identity swapping quest. And there's some forced things from the original Ghost Camp that are thrown in there to kind of make it tie together, even though it's not set at the same camp and it doesn't involve the same campers whatsoever. And that's bothersome. But the story is still riveting nonetheless. Minus one reveal near the end that just kind of makes me pissed off. This one is pretty much a high C tier for me. I think I gave this like a 3.8 out of 5. I could be mistaken. I might have given it a little bit lower, but that's where I'm thinking this book is at. It's a high C tier for me. Definitely overhated. All right. At number 9, we have the only TV book here, and I've mentioned this in the past when I do TV books and rankings. I only include them just because, why not? But the TV books, when I make reviews of them, I don't go into them with like a critical mind. I'm literally just reviewing them based on, are they a good supplement to the episode? Because these were literally designed to be replacements for episodes when kids couldn't catch them on syndicated television. So I'm placing it here based on my enjoyment. And this is the only time you'll see me do that is in rankings, right? And it's TV book number 3, the TV book adaptation of the Welcome to Camp Nightmare episode, which was based on the Welcome to Camp Nightmare book. I put it here. It's mostly fine. It's still a solid story. The Welcome to Camp Nightmare story is one of the most iconic camp stories in all of Goosebumps. It's still a fun time, but the problem with this is it doesn't really add anything that you can't get from the episode or the book. So it kind of puts itself here. You know what I mean? Like, it's a truncated version of the book, and I think the book is definitely more scarier. It's definitely more tense, even though this is more to the point. It cuts out a lot of the fluff and the repetitiveness that the book can have at sometimes, but the scenes just aren't as remarkable. And I think the scenes that they do highlight, they're done actually better on screen in its episode counterpart. So, you know, I guess you get photos included, but that's not really doing this story justice. But nonetheless, still entertaining. I think in terms of enjoyment, I'd maybe give this like a 4 out of 5 stars. So take that with a grain of salt. So there's that. And number 8, we're going back to the Tales short story collection. More Tales to give you goosebumps. And we have a story called Poison Ivy. This, I think I gave a 4 out of 5 stars on a short story basis. And this one kind of fluctuates with me, right? I can kind of float this or like a 4.25. But I reread it because I forgot a lot about it for this before this ranking. So I wanted to kind of freshen myself up on it. And I still think it's a very good one. Just it's just kind of too short for its own good. Poison Ivy is essentially about, it's kind of like a sports camp, and these kids are playing baseball, and Poison Ivy breaks out on the baseball field, and it's like pretty much like a creature feature, but it's very tense and it's very unique, especially for fans of plant stories. I know a lot of people that love Stay Out of the Basement and Your Plant Food. They consider this like another plant story, like plant horror. It's a very niche thing, but it has a cult following for the short stories, I would say. It's pretty solid. It's solid build-up, solid ending to it, just not a lot to it. So there's that. All right. At number, where are we at? Number 7 overall. We have the next original 62 camp book I want to talk about, and it is The Horror at Camp Jelly Jam. I think I gave this like a 4.2 out of 5 stars. Not quite in that love territory, but it's still a very good Goosebumps book. It's very well written, very well paced, and the tension throughout the book is very good. However, my biggest issue with it is kind of getting into that back half of the story, and there's the first few chapters were kind of boring, you know, setting the kids up at the sports camp that they just miraculously had fallen into. It's not really the most entertaining thing. But once it kicks on, it gets good until like I said, the final act, where you realize how much of a non-threat King Jelly Jam is. And I'm not trying to hate on King Jelly Jam to Jelly Jam fans out there. I just think he's very weak. He's just not intimidating to me. He's kind of a goofy villain, and it just takes me out of the story, if I'm being honest. But other than that, very solid book. I can totally see why this is a fan favorite Goosebumps book. This was like the 3rd one I ever read. So me and this book go way back. This is one of the most read Goosebumps books from me, because I used to read this one a lot when I was younger. Not so much, I don't find myself wanting to read it as much as anymore, because I think there are some better books, in my opinion, but very, very good book. And to round out the Tales short stories at number 6, we have the final one to talk about in this collection, and it is called P.S. Don't Write Back. I gave this story a 4.5 out of 5, and honestly, it could fluctuate too, like up to like a 4.75, but I decided on a 4.5 here. This story is so creepy that if you've never read a single camp story, but you're curious to see what they're like in Goosebumps, you should actually try this one first. It's short and sweet, it's like 10 pages, but holy crap, man. The story had me going. It's one of those mind screwy type of stories where you think something's happening, but something else might be happening. It has a lot of notes reminiscent to a certain plot beat in Welcome to Camp Nightmare. I think that's what kind of holds me back from it, because it just feels a little too familiar. But the premise is solid. You know, you got a kid, finds a note. It's from these people that may or may not be trying to break through to him about his parents, like not wanting to be around him anymore. And he's going through this whole book, this whole story, I should say, kind of grieving about his parents not wanting him anymore. But there's more to it. You know, it's one of those different stories you can only get from this. It's hard to explain. I really enjoyed it, though. It's it pains me not to put it in my top 5, but I just think there's 5 other things that I like better. Okay, so there's that. Now, my top 5, these are pretty much my golden recommendations. These are all A tier. You know, I would say as well, P.S. Don't Write Back is an A tier as well. So if you want to count this as like a top 6, be my guest. But these are all A tiers. If you haven't read these, you're missing out very much. And at number 5, we have the last of the modern camp books, and it's called Creature Teacher: The Final Exam. I gave this a 4.6 out of 5 stars. This was easily one of my favorite most wanted books. This was definitely in my top 3 from that series, like the 3 big highlights I can recommend. But this took me by surprise. As a massive fan of the original Creature Teacher book, I was hoping that this book would deliver, and it did. It's just one of those crazy, off-the-wall type of stories that you just don't see coming the way it does. And the way the story unfolds is very creepy, very reminiscent to that original Creature Teacher formula, but with a new spin on it. It's honestly, if you took the horror Camp Jelly Jam and you blended it with Creature Teacher, you get over-the-top camp challenges, some terrifying visuals. Now, there are some things that just really don't make logical sense involving camp counselors, and there's some things about the way the story wraps up that just kind of irk me. But this is a very, very good book. I would say great, honestly. If you haven't tried this, you need to check it out. All right, at number 4, this might upset a lot of you, but I have to be honest with myself. I think I like its episode counterpart more. So we have the third, I think the second to last original 62 camp book, and it's book number 9 from the original 62 book series, Welcome to Camp Nightmare. I think the last time I read this, I gave it a 4.6 out of 5. I used to rate this book a lot higher, but I think the last time I read it, I realized that the book has a lot of things going on. I honestly feel like there's too much going on in the plot, where you just have all these action scenes just kind of piling on top, and it just got a little too much for me, for my personal taste. And the ending is very infamous. If you know the ending, I think it's like the last page of the book. People are just like, no. Some people absolutely hate this book for that last page, honestly. And I can see why. I don't necessarily think it's hateable, but it is a detracting point. But other than those things, Welcome to Camp Nightmare has one of the greatest Goosebumps protagonists of all time with Billy Harlan. Some things that this character goes through in this book are very harrowing, things that kids should not be able to go through for any means necessary. You know, we watch this main character face adversity, go into the unknowns, witness unfathomable things that just cloud the main character's judgment, but also inspires them to become a hero. And it's just one of those books that you know you're reading greatness when you read it. It's hard to explain, but it's easily one of the most popular Goosebumps books of all time, and for good reason. It's kind of become overshadowed because of books like Jelly Jam, you know, getting like a massive following to it these days. But I would say that this is still one of the best. Even of the best of the original 62 book series. It's definitely deserved where I put it. But my number 3 goes, like I said, to his episode counterpart. And I have here the DVD it's included on. We have Welcome to Camp Nightmare Part 1 and Part 2. This came out in Season 1 of the show. It surprisingly wasn't a R.L. Stine special, but it was made into a 2-parter in the season, and it's, I think, one of the fan favorite episodes from the entire show. And if you've ever watched it, you know what I'm talking about. It does cut out some mild filler from the book. It keeps most of the core creepy scenes that the book had. But the way this episode is shot is just absolutely amazing. I mean, you really can't understand its magnitude unless you watch it. It's just something about the cinematography. There's certain scenes, the way they're shot, and certain character performances that just add to the tension, and it's just so memorable for the show. It seems more expansive than your average episode from the show because it's set outside, and even though the show was low budget, they were able to make this episode feel a lot more bigger budget than usual. And everybody was having fun in this episode, and you can clearly tell. And there's just so many iconic things from this episode here, and you can see on the back. I still haven't opened my copy here, but it's Welcome to Camp Nightmares right here included. If you have not watched this episode, this is an absolute classic. It really is. You're doing yourself an injustice. I think I gave this like a 4.9 out of 5 stars. It's very close to being perfect. My only issue with the episode is it kept the book's ending. And like I said, it's a mild detraction. But this is a very well-made episode. One of the best of the TV show, easily. But my top 2, I think, are better. These 2 are 5 out of 5 stars. Honestly, they kind of go back and forth in my brain. But I have to be honest with myself, and I'm going to keep it the way I intended it, you know, when I made the list, before I made the video. And at number 2, we have the only Give Yourself Goosebumps book centered around the camp theme, and it is called Escape from Camp, Run for Your Life. I gave this book a perfect 5 out of 5 stars. I had so much fun reading this book, you have no idea. If I can handpick, you know, I might do a video on this at some point. If I can handpick the most fun Goosebumps books you can ever read, a good amount of them will come from the Give Yourself Goosebumps series. But this book here, man, from the iconic Mark Nagata cover to the premise of the story itself, this has like 2 different arcs. I think one deals with zombies and the other deals with like alien invasions and the governments and stuff. But it's wild. And the villain of the story, the main villain you'll see, is called the Cemetery Man. He is one of the scariest Goosebumps villains and the most fun Goosebumps villain. One of the most fun ones, at least, that I've ever encountered in the series. This was just a blast from start to finish. It has that textbook writing that you expect from a camp book. The atmosphere is very good for a Give Yourself Goosebumps book. And it's very gory. I mean, you would not expect half the stuff that you'll read in this story unless you've read it before. This is easily one of the big standouts from the camp genre. And even the zombie stories. This is kind of a zombie story, too. So, yeah. One of my favorite zombie books, if not the best one, too. So, very, very amazing book. It might be, as of now, it might be in my top 10 books from the whole series, if I'm being honest. But it's not better than my number 1, and this is the last of the original 62 camp books I needed to discuss. This book's an absolute masterpiece. This is one of the masterpieces of the series. And it's unfortunate because when I think about my top 5 favorite Goosebumps books, this is always on there, but when I think of my favorite things overall, like episodes, short stories, this gets nudged out of my top 5. And though that's unfair, but it goes to Ghost Camp, which was book number 45 from the original series. This gets a 5 out of 5 stars for me. This book is so creepy and so dark that it almost transcends the Goosebumps series in itself. Goosebumps is known for having mostly silly homage-type horror stories. There are some that kind of push that controversy. There are some that cross that proverbial boundary of what you probably should share with kids. But Ghost Camp, it's up there with like Piano Lessons Can Be Murder, The Haunted Mask, Are You Terrified Yet, and Werewolf Skin for me. Like, it's in my top 5 books. If we're taking out the GYGs and all the other stuff out of the equation, this book is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the sibling connection you'll read in the story is harrowing. You feel legitimate stakes with the story. Not often you get legitimate stakes. Not like something where kids are afraid of not being able to go to summer camp and some Night of the Living Dummy stories. Or you'll see some trivial things that kids hang their hat on, and that's the stakes of the book. Now here, it's pretty much do or die. And it puts kids in situations they really never have to deal with. And the monsters of the story are so creepy and creative, especially for like a ghost archetype story. It's just something that you have to read once in the series. And I guarantee you, most people, especially these days, and I'm glad that Ghost Camp is getting more respect than more respect that it's deserved over the years. Because back then, Ghost Camp was not that popular. People loved Jelly Jam and Camp Nightmare, but they hated on Ghost Camp and Cold Lake. And now it seems to be kind of reversing itself. But Ghost Camp, absolute masterpiece of a Goosebumps book, and it's my all-time favorite Goosebumps camping story. So yeah, that's my ranking video of all the camping stories in Goosebumps from worst to best. Like I said before, let me know down in the comment section what your ranking would look like, what's your favorite, what's your least favorite. I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.